chocolate chip muffin. This is something we can't provide via Zoom. I yes, whichever, that's both. I mean, you can dip in, and I I did as as Florian insisted, being a good I put it in the freezer, in the youth lounge freezer for the morning, knowing so that no one would be in, like, sort of like in between. It's all like ice cream. Anyway, for people who like to read, our summer reading is the Aleppo Codex by Matti Friedman, should one wish. It's fun. I think it's totally insightful and good, and he's a good writer. I like it. It's easily available, used or anything like that online, and it's insightful. It gives a good sense of both Torah, mid 20th century Jewish history, and that's a sense of Jewish community in Syria, which is often, less familiar to most Ashkenazim, and the early years of the state of Israel, and planting the seeds of some of the tension between different Jewish communities in Israel that are still super present. So this is Saturday, July 8th, like Havdalah. That's so that. Yes. Otherwise, you're going to come in like sort of a. Oh, all right. The idea is that we're at the end, and I wanted to take a handful of different themes we've been talking about it and see what we do with it. So first, the bracha by Torah study is Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiditanu mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. And welcome to Eileen, who's been online all this year and is just feeling well enough to venture out. So, brucha ba'ah. I frequently, if you've been paying attention, though, one of the things I love referencing is the yeshiva of Shem and Eber. Right? Pick this up. So I just want to do a deep dive into this. The Torah that exists before the Torah. The sages will always refer to the Torah before the Torah. So again, all year we've been Pashanim, reading like what do the words say? But the real fun is in what the sages say about what the words say. And again, I don't think the Torah or the Bible was canonized, became the holy book based on just the words on parchment. I think it became what it is because of the words on parchment and because of the stories that people told about it. It's not what it says, it's how people understand what it says. Make sense? So like this stuff, a lot of Jews, especially non-Orthodox Jews, are like, it's a bunch of rabbis talking. Who cares? But that bunch of rabbis talking, one, where do you think the Torah came from to begin with? Two, that's I think what made the community accept it. I think it's true for Jews. I think it's true for Christians. And again, it's like if you think of like the Supreme Court, what does the Constitution mean? What the court says it means. You can study the words on paper, but and that will tell you something, but it won't tell you what it means. It means, or like how it lives out in life. It means what people say it means. So this is how the one line of how the rabbis understood it. So we said the bracha? Yes. Yes. I'm not good at this. So I start out with just like the key thing at the end of the Noah story, like the Noah, gets drunk, on point, and this is where the similarity ends. Passes out naked, and has a the scene Canaan something looks at him and maybe something else, and gets cursed, and then Noah says, "Blessed be Hashem, the God of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them. May God enlarge Yaphath, Shem's son, Yaphath, the other brother, sorry, and let him dwell in the tents of Shem, and let Canaan be a slave to them. So, pulling on this, what I want to ask, or the question that gets asked is, on this last line, let him dwell in the tents of Shem. What's that mean? Who's the him? Right, that seems to be the previous guys don't say, and may dwell in the tents of Shem. Baruch Adonai Hashem, Vehi Canaan Aved Lamo Yafat Elohim Liafot Vishkon Boel Shem. Exactly that. That's what the sages say. Elaine's explanation, which is the he refers to God. May God dwell in the tent of Shem. Now, where does God dwell? Everywhere. Everywhere. Where does God really dwell? Nowhere. Let's get more specific. There's heaven, and on earth, where do we find God? In Jerusalem, more specifically in the temple, right? That's less specific. Right in the temple, like this is God's dwelling place. And since the destruction of the temple, where does God dwell? In our sanctuaries. In the study of Torah is where God dwells, right? The everywhere thing, as we've discovered, is not necessarily a biblical conception, right? Like they don't know of this God dwelling everywhere. We all know it, but nobody told the authors of the book of Genesis that was the case, right? And like the tradition is that God dwells, that when people study Torah, God dwells there. God dwells in the Beit Midrash. God dwells where people sort of like allow God in, right? Where you try and figure out, what does God want of us? In the study halls, the Beit Midrash. So the fact that God dwells in the Beit Midrash, in the study halls where you study Torah, and that God's going to dwell in the tent of Shem, in the dwelling place of Shem, is
Somebody who
studies Torah.
But there isn't Torah yet.
Says you. Right. So this is sort of the math of it. We know that we find God in studying Torah, and we know that God is dwelling in the tent. That the blessing is that God dwells in the tent of Shem, and Shem and Aver, and his son Aver, as we know, like are going to live super long times compared to everyone else in the genealogy list of Genesis 10. So Shem and his son Aver live a long time. The others generally less so. So what are they doing all these years? Well, if God's dwelling in Shem's tent, that means that Shem is out teaching Torah. There's a primordial Torah that precedes the Torah, right? We know from other midrashim that before God creates the world, God looks at the Torah as a blueprint, essentially. God's blueprint for the creation of the universe is Torah. Does that answer your question?
It's in our imagination. In other words, we're the creators. God doesn't exist.
Well, God doesn't exist is not a perspective shared by Chazal. The sages aren't on board with God doesn't exist. You're saying that even in the story, right? So there's a thing, God, right, and that is one of the things that the sages will bark up that tree. That if that Nancy said that if we don't call God into being intellectually, as it were, that God doesn't exist. That indeed, God doesn't exist in this world unless we bring God into it. Like that actually is something that they say relatively frequently in different ways. That and it's almost that you can drive God out of your space or out of your life or out of your life, or you can bring God in, right? So it's famous. Right. So this is part of the covenant idea. Who's the creator? That there's a partnership, that God creates us and the world, and then sort of like is locked out, and that we create the space for God to come in. That's why they'll say, like, when you study Torah, God is brought in. When 2 people sit and speak words of halakha, God is brought in there. When 10 people gather and say Yehei Shmei, right? When you have a minyan to say Kaddish, like this, that God is welcomed into that room. And that otherwise, God sort of like, the key isn't there. It is like this thing that like brings God in. So yes, which is a daring theological point. That's what the rabbis say, again and frequently. So, how do we know all this happened? Next text is on the little sheet. Oh, I got to send a sheet to you guys. Let me see if I can share this with people who are far off. Share. And you went with the link. And all right. So I can also share my screen, I guess. So our first text, Genesis 28. This is Jacob's fleeing his brother, right? After the whole birthright fiasco, Jacob runs off, and this is the very beginning of Parshat Vayetze. So Vayetze Yaakov Beersheva, Jacob left Beersheva and set out for Haran. He came upon literally the place, and he slept and he spent the night there. After the sun had set, taking one of the stones of the place of that place again. Ma'avne hamakom. He took one of those of that place. He put it under his head, and he lay down in that place. Ba makom hahu. He had a dream. A stairway set on the ground, and the top reached the sky, and messengers of God were going up and down. So the sage's question is that reading the vowels as the text is vocalized, it says he reached Bamakom. He reached not Bimakom, which is he came to a place. He came to the place. And so one is specific spot, and then it says that he lay down in that place again, Bamakom, hahu, the hahu again limiting, and so Rashi on this, pulling from the early midrash, says the hahu has limited force, meaning that it's narrowing it down. Why does it say he lay down in that place? It could just say he lay down. Good. This is like exactly how reading the Torah works, right? Like where it's like there shouldn't be any extra words. They could have got away with saying he lay down. Where else is he going to lay down? It's the place where he's at. Like there's no other option. So if it says you lay down in that place, it's weird because you lay down in the place where you're at, like in that place, and they're reading it as if it's saying like, oh, he lay down in that place, he lay down, and here he sleeps, right? It's like I don't know, you have a baby or whatever, and it's like we bought this fancy crib, won't sleep in the crib. We put him in his car seat, we put him in our bed. Here he sleeps. Right, and when you say it's car seat, here he sleeps, what you're saying is And in his crib, there he doesn't sleep. So he lay down in that place. They're like, he laid in that place, he lay down, is how we would like stress it. Which means that, but during the previous 14 years, when he sat on his teachers at school of Aber, he never slept at night, for he was incessantly engaged in the study of Torah. Takes us from Genesis Rabbah. So notice what he's doing here. Rashi says that, because it says, and the Midrash says, that he lay down in that place. It's like, in that place he laid down. But in other places, he didn't. What were the other places? School. You know what he did? He didn't party all night. In school, he was studying Torah. That's why we learn from the Makom Ahu that this is unique that he's sleeping at night. Otherwise, he wouldn't sleep at night. So that's thing one. So thing two, and this is also essential to the whole picture, is that it's actually the previous piece that the earlier, if you look on the second page here, we're given weirdly the I think it was the end of Chayei Sarah. It gives us the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years, then he breathed his last and died and was gathered to his kin. Yosef Elamav. And the Rashi will say the same thing, pulling from the Talmud. I just brought the Talmud piece here. And the Talmud asks, why were the years of Ishmael mentioned in the Torah? Who cares about Ishmael? I'm following the main family. I want to know about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Why are you telling me all about Ishmael? What do I care how old Ishmael was? This is the rabbis asking the question that we tend to ask, which is what seems like useless information doing here in the Torah? This is supposed to be divine and from God, and I got useless information about how old Ishmael is. And their answer is, in order to figure out Jacob's life. Jacob we care about. Ishmael, not so much. So we're given the years of Ishmael so that we can do, and there's this long section of the Talmud that I skipped most of here. But we know it says that Ishmael was 137. How much older was Ishmael than Isaac? He's 14 years older. We know this because first, Abraham circumcises Ishmael at 13 years, then Sarah conceives. Right? So he's 14 years older. So Abraham was 86 years old, and Hagar bore Ishmael to Abraham. And it's written that Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. So we can do the math on this, and it goes into all the detailed of like whenever it says how old somebody is, and it goes on and on and on. And they learn from all of this that when you do the math of how old Jacob was when he goes to Haran and meets Rachel and Leah, and how old he would have been at the scene of the stealing of the birthright, there's a gap. It says it turns out Joseph was away from his father for 22 years. Joseph was away from his father for 22 years. They do the same math there. Jacob was away from his father for the same period of time. How do we account for the difference? But then they do the math. Jacob was away for actually 36 years. So why do we say that Jacob was away for 22 years, just like Joseph was away for 22 years? 14 years, he was the house of Aver, are not counted. He was 14 years lost. What is he doing for those 14 years? Studying Torah with Aver. How do we know Aver was studying Torah? Well, Shem and Aver are alive. By this point, it's only Aver that's alive. And we know that God dwelt in the tent of Shem. God dwelling in the tent means you're studying Torah. Jacob's last 14 years sitting in yeshiva. Next text proving this point. When the boys grew up, Esau was a skillful hunter, a man of the outdoors, but Jacob was a mild man who stayed in camp. Yoshev Oalim. What does it mean, dwelled in tents, they translate stayed in camp, literally, Yoshev Oalim, dwelled in tents. Tents, multiple tents. What? They're so rich, they have multiple tents, they got multiple houses? No, they got one house that he dwells in. Oh, wait a minute. Where else have we seen a tent and dwelling? Noah says that God's going to dwell in the tent of Shem and Aver. And so that means that if he's dwelling in tents, that means that it's the tent, not just his home tent, but also the tent of Shem and Aver. Studying Torah. Yaakov, such a good student. Even further, even before even before they were born, says when
you
Leah
scroll up a little?
had a difficult pregnancy, the children struggled in her womb, and she said, "Im ken lama za anochi?" And she's, if so, why do I exist? So she went to inquire the
Rabbi,
Lord. So what is
can
it?
you
She went
scroll
to
up a bit?
inquire. Leveit Midrasho shall shame. She went to inquire at Shem's Beit Midrash. How do the rabbis know this? I didn't put it on the page. They know it because they're uncomfortable with God speaking to a woman. That it seems to be that God speaks that she asks God and God speaks and God responds directly to her. They're uncomfortable with that because it's not so proper for a man to speak to a woman. God here being coded male, without other people around, right? Like this sort of. So must be that she went through an intermediary. Who's the intermediary? Shem. Partly because we also know that when the other midrashim, when she walks past, imagine this, when she walks past a house of idolatry, she feels Esav kicking. Esav wants to get out and go worship idols. When she walks past the Beit Midrash of Shem and Aver, Yaakov kicks because he wants to get out and study Torah.
Rabbi, please scroll down a bit.
Okay. So this now my favorite little bit. This is I'll take a break and have a little muffin here. Yeah. Muffin? You need me to pass around the muffins? Anyone back?
I mean, I would eat one that somebody passed away.
So there.
I'm gonna tell Linda I got served by the rabbi.
Yes. Baruch atah Olam borei minei mizonot.
Hey,
Joseph, this all comes to a head as the whole book of Genesis does with Joseph. Yisrael ahavet Yosef michol banav. He ben zukanim hu. Now Israel, Jacob, loved Joseph best of all his sons, for he was a child of his old age. He made him an ornamented tunic. Which is a weird phrase because, of course, Joseph is indeed a child of Jacob's old age, but you know who else is? Benjamin. Benjamin's a child of his even older age, right? Right, he's the youngest. So why isn't Benjamin the favorite? Why is Joseph the favorite? There's a few different reads on this. One is that Joseph, looks like beloved Rachel, right? They're both Yafat's Torah, which is beautiful of form, which is the Torah way of saying they were hot. So like so both Rachel and we know this, like sort of like Jacob sees Rachel and he's like, he's out of control. And Mrs. Potiphar sees Joseph and she's essentially out of control, right? Like they have this sort of like, they have this sexual thing going on that like people just are go nuts. So there's that, like maybe that like he's just best looking kid.
It's just kind of many colors.
Yes, yeah. That's just a translation of Ketona Pasim. You could King James translate coats of many colors, which is better if you're staging a musical. But Onklos, the oldest Aramaic translation of the Torah that we have, translates not child of his old age, but says that he was a wise son to him. That's how he translates that phrase, right? So Rashi's like, well, why why does Unclos understand old age, son of his old age, to being like that he was a wise son? Well, because he wasn't just the good-looking kid, he was the kid who wanted to study Torah, right? And so all that Jacob had learned from those 14 years of learning in yeshiva with Shem and Aver already dead by the time Joseph's on the scene, he can teach to Joseph. And Joseph is a good student. So, which we know, Joseph is smart and analytical and can keep things in his head and can sort of like process things. He's a good ruler, right? Like, so he's a quick study. So we know that, so we have this, he was a wise child and we know that he was wise. So why is in fact Joseph the favorite? Because he was good at studying Torah. How does this come in handy? Part 3, this is page 4. The whole Joseph story happens. We're skipping to the end of it. The end of it, there's this weird moment. And this I get from James Kugel's in Potiphar's House, which does a great job of breaking down Midrashim. He says, when the brothers are coming back from being saved by Joseph, after he reveals himself, after the whole story is played out, and he's like, just go back and get dad and come back here because the famine's on its way. And so Torah says they went up from Egypt and came to their father Jacob, the land of Canaan. And they told him, Joseph is still alive. Yes, he's ruler over the whole land of Egypt. And his, Jacob, heart went numb, for he did not believe them, which makes sense. Why wouldn't he believe them?
They had the proof of the coat.
One, they had the proof of the coat, and they lied, right? And they deceived him, right? Like they're sort of dishonest guys, and Joseph's been gone for 22 years. If he was 22 years gone, like,
He's there.
right, he's coming to peace with, he's dead, he's gone. And his sons, it's reasonable he could assume, like, aren't the most reliable people around, right? Like, even when they're like, we want to bring Benjamin down, like, he was hesitant in doing so. So he didn't believe them, step 1. But when they recounted all that Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the wagons, akalot, that Joseph had sent to transport him, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. Enough, said Israel. My son Joseph is still alive. I must go and see him before I die. The rabbi's question is, there's a big switch here. He doesn't believe them. They say Joseph is alive. They don't believe him. And then they say what happened. They report something that Joseph said to them, and he sees the wagons, and then he's like, I believe you. What's up with that? What changes? What did they say? And what do the wagons have to do with it? This is the big question. What do the brothers say, and why are the wagons thrown in there? So clearly there must have been some secret code, right? Sorry, muffins, crumbs.
Yeah, that'll fix it.
Sort of I need to get water. Yeah. Hold on.
Thanks, Nancy. Now I choked on a crumb.
Elaine Bergen joke around. Delicious pie.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks, Nancy.
There we are. I can't take a large enough swig of the coconut flavored tequila. So so the words of Joseph. So that's thing 1, like that there's this weird moment of like the words of Joseph. Kol divrei Yosef, siman masar lahem. There's evidence that it was Joseph. Again, there's got to be a code. There's got to, like, as with anything, they have to convey something that they wouldn't know, that only Joseph and Jacob shared, right? By definition. Otherwise, it doesn't work. The story, the story doesn't work. So as Joseph is saying this message, he had informed them of the subject. They had been studying with his father at the time when he left him. That so Joseph told them that about how they were studying the laws of the heifer who has his neck broken. This is in the book of Deuteronomy, the maftir of Parshat something. It's in the summertime, we never remember. It's like August. Is when we hit it. Agulah means wagons. If you're pulling your kid along in Israel, you put them in the agul. And it also means calf, like the Egel Hazahav, the golden calf, right? So it means wagon, means calf. So the rabbis pick that up, that what if it's not the plain sense of wagons that they're being sent to schlep them back, right? The carriages are being sent to bring them back to Egypt. But there's a reference here to the agulah, the heifer, that was in the last piece of Torah that they were that Jacob and Joseph were studying together. Like, you remember the last conversation you had with somebody, not like if, what you said this morning to somebody, or but the last conversation you had with a loved one before they died, God forbid, probably have a sense of it, right? Like, you remember what was said, you just do. And you might not forget it. And especially in, God forbid, this sort of situation, right? Jacob sends Joseph on his way to go to his brothers, and Joseph never comes back. So people are, by definition, you're always either I can't believe my last words were wipe your mouth or whatever it is, right? So whatever that is, you remember that conversation, and you would, by definition, you would never forget. So that's part of it, is that Joseph and Jacob know what was said in that last conversation when Jacob said, go get your brothers, and Joseph never comes back. So what the brothers say to him is an explanation of, Joseph said, you were studying this, the laws of the agulah, the heifer, not just the wagons, but they explained to him, he says this, and there's no way the brothers could know that without Joseph having told them. Now, pause. We're together on this? Yes?
You're studying Torah.
Mm.
Torah confident.
Note that to the sages, to the tradition, Torah isn't just this. This sort of the Torah is just the 5 books that we have here. It's just foreign to them. The Jewish tradition just sort of is yeah, I get that that's sort of a way of understanding Torah, but it's not it's not the main way of understanding Torah. Torah is God's blueprint for the universe. And this is a distillation of that. But the world would never have existed without Torah. So Torah pre-exists all of this. There's more here about, I didn't put on the sheet of Abraham studying Torah and that. They're all, and Isaac, but yeah, they're all studying Torah. It is God's will for us in the universe, or sort of how we're supposed to live our lives. This is Torah.
Okay. But you're talking about something that appears in.
This is what's amazing about this one, which is that, and I'm going to do it next, is that not only if it were love your neighbor as yourself, like sort of fine. Or by the way, the rabbi's like, oh, if he got to the laws of the heifer whose neck you have to break, then certainly he had covered things like the 10 Commandments, right? And what Joseph's shining moment of ethics is his resistance of Mrs. Potiphar, right? She takes a pass at him, a hard pass at him, and he's like, I can't do this. And how does he know? He says, I will sin. It would be a sin against my master, my boss, and against my God. How does he know that? Jacob had taught him the 10 Commandments, right? Like sort of like he had known, don't commit adultery.
Something, you know, if they know that the Ten Commandments are, wouldn't they have known of slavery? And I can just see, you know.
Is slavery forbidden in the Torah? Oh, meaning that, that it's going to happen to them.
Slaves for longer,
Right, correct. So this is the thing, like, is that like what's in that primordial Torah? Again, I would say sort of like, obviously not that, right? Again, we say Moses received the Torah at Mount Sinai, but you know, if he had received like that Torah, he would be able to say, oh, Aaron, can you remind me, like when I get upset near rocks, just grab the staff, just take the staff out of my hand, just remind me, right? It's on you, just tell me not to, right? Stop me before I strike the rock again. Like so it's both. It's like content, but not content. It's not the Agadah so much, maybe as the halacha. It's not the stories as much as it is like the laws and principles.
It time shifts.
It definitely time shifts.
So is it safe to say that this concept of Torah, a free speech, our concept, current concept of Torah, is man's attempt to understand the world around him?
Yes, it could be something like that, though. They wouldn't say that it's man's attempt. They would say that this is that the earlier generations like had God's teaching, as it were, right? And this is part of like, why is God so upset with idolaters if the idolaters aren't, you know, like there's supposed to be something that they're doing and people know it, right? So this, and that is, I would say that it's not as simple as be a nice person. It's not everything I need to know I learned in kindergarten, because Jacob has to study 14 years. And it's not 14 years of 9 to 5, because we know he doesn't sleep. It's hard stuff. So yeah. Also, I mean, you could say from the outside that the rabbis just can't imagine a world where you're not studying Torah. Like that's just sort of, it's mind-blowing.
So the words were written down on something.
Maybe it was just all oral Torah before then. Here's the law. Here's the law of the heifer. The law of the heifer is Deuteronomy 21. If in the land that now your God is assigning to you to possess, someone slain is found lying in the open, the identity of the slayer not being known, your elders and magistrates shall go out and measure the distance from the corpse to the nearby town. So this is, get the scene. This is in Deuteronomy, says that if you find a body, somebody who clearly has died a violent death, and it's not in town A and it's not in town B, it's just in the field, and like somebody's like going off in the field and they find this, then your elders and magistrates, the leaders, should go out and measure distance from the corpse to the nearby towns. The elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall then take a heifer, which has never been worked, which has never pulled a yoke, and the elders of that town shall bring the heifer down to an ever-flowing wadi, to a stream that's not seasonal, but like a river that flows year-round, which is not tilled or sown. There in the wadi, they shall break the heifer's neck. The priests, the sons of Levi, shall come forward. And for you, Adonai, God, has chosen them for divine service and to pronounce blessing in the name of God. And every lawsuit, in case of assault, is subject to their ruling. Then all the elders of the town nearest to the corpse shall wash their hands over the heifer, again, ha'agala, Eglah, whose neck was broken in the wadi. And they shall make this declaration: our hands did not shed this blood, nor did our eyes see that it was done. Absolve, Adonai, your people Israel, whom you redeemed, and do not let guilt for the blood of the innocent remain among your people Israel, and they will be absolved of the blood guilt. Good face. So this is when you, if you find, not, this is the opposite of pagan. So when you find somebody,
Kill somebody, make sure you don't do it.
Right.
You do it out.
well, this is, if you can catch, if you catch the person, then you have to catch them. Like this is, there's a, seems to be, again, obviously you can only guess as to what this is doing, but made it under the Torah, so we have to try. If there is a violent act, somebody's life has been taken, what you can't do is shrug your shoulders and say, guess he got away with it. So notice what's going on here. There's an obligation that whatever the nearest town is, the leaders, the grandees of the town have to come out. They have to do this ritual and lose something valuable, right? The young heifer who has never been worked. And then they wash their hands and say, our hands not shed this blood, nor did I see it done. Please forgive your people, God, who have you redeemed, and don't let the guilt of the blood of the innocent remain among your people. This is like, when there is blood guilt, then you're forever tainted and guilty, right? If this is whatever you're guilty of, this you have to make amends for, right? If I steal from you, I have to pay it back. If I cut off your hand, God forbid, then the same, like the equivalent is supposed to come back to me, right? You need to balance things out for a sense of justice. Here, where there's an unsolved murder, you can't get that justice. I can't punish the killer because I don't know who the killer is. So in the end, this is a thing. So that the heifer is like the stand-in, and they say the leaders of town have to say, we didn't do this, we didn't see it. Absolve, please God, forgive us of this blood guilt.
They killed the heifer, they washed their hands in the heifer's blood.
Not in his blood, but they wash their
And
hands,
then
yeah.
And they're asking for forgiveness for the person who is
For us,
correct.
for not, so the question is like, what are they asking for forgiveness for? As
And they're responsible for a member of their communities.
right, this seems to be it. Somebody died. They're their brother's keeper. Somebody died. We're the leaders of the town. It's our responsibility to make sure that we have a system where people don't get murdered. And so
Warding off tribal retribution.
so it could be that, there are other ways of like their Goel Adam, things like that, but they could be part of that, which is to say that they are saying, we tried. And by the way, the next thing is again, from the sages sort of asking like, what's this all about? It says, the elders say our hands have not shed this blood and our eyes have not seen it. They're asking, wait a minute, is it possible to think the elders of the court are murderers? Like, sort of like, what do you mean we have not shed this blood? Nobody was accusing you. You're like you're the mayors, you're the elder, you're one of the leaders of the community. Like, you're not, like, we didn't think you did it. So why do they have to say, our hands have not shed this blood and we do not see it.
Would there be,
Right, well, anyone who eats a hamburger, like, it can't complain about, like, sort of like about things happening to animals. We must therefore say that they mean that he did not come to us and we sent him away, nor did we see him and we left him. I.e., he did not come to us and we sent him away without provision, nor did we see him and left him without an escort. Meaning that there's that why do they say we didn't do this and we didn't see him? Because there are obligations that exist that when a stranger comes to your town, you're supposed to welcome him, provide for him, make sure that he has enough food. And when he leaves town, you don't just wave bye-bye. You're supposed to help get him to the next place. That's actually your obligation. That's why they have to go out into the field. That's why it's the closest town, presumably where he came from. They're like, they're saying, if he had come to us, we would have done all of our obligations, which is to say, to walk him out, to feed him and to walk him out of town. If we had walked him out of town, he would have been killed because we'd have been walking with him. So this is partly in answer to, this is what Kugel comes down, like sort of like asking, Kugel asks, why had Jacob and Joseph been studying the law of the heifer? Why this weird law of all the things we could say that Jacob and Joseph were studying? Why the law of the heifer that you have to break its neck and then wash your hands and make a declaration? That's weird. And it's also super specific. Jacob and Joseph, as Kugel correctly says, could have been studying the wagons of the tabernacle. There are other wagons in the Tanakh, like they have wagons that they use to transport all the stuff from the tabernacle that Leviticus talks about. Or even the sin of the golden calf. Again, same root. Like if you want that same word, agolah, there are different ways you can use it. But the key thing is the connection between that law and the fact of Joseph's departure. In other words, Jacob himself was busy fulfilling the duties owed to a traveler. In this case, his own son, Joseph. Joseph is saying to Jacob, I know you did all the things. He accompanied him all the way from the mountains in which Hebron sits to the lowland, because the Torah says that they separated in the wadi outside of Hebron. Hebron's in the mountains, and Jacob leaves him in the wadi, which means that they had traveled a distance. Why did they travel a distance? Because Jacob knows the laws. You don't just say bye to somebody at the edge of town. You accompany them along their way. Well, Joseph is being sent by himself to go get the brothers.
Oh, okay.
Right. Right, yeah. He accompanied him all the way from the mountains in which Hebron sits to the lowland, and on his way explained to his son. And so this is like, why were they studying this? He's like, oh, I'm going through the trouble of doing this. Oh, well, like I'm walking you out because this is actually the law that we know in primordial Torah. And I spent 14 years in yeshiva studying that when you leave, you don't leave them at the edge. You give them some food and you walk them part of the way there. Like, and that this is why I'm doing this for you, son, because this is the Torah law. And if you don't do it, then all this stuff, the elders break the calf's neck and the prison law of the heifer, which he then outlined. Thus, many years later, when Joseph finally sends word back to his father that he's alive, he instructs his brothers to mention the agalot, the heifers, as a way of reminding Jacob of the last conversation that the two had. So it's all like woven together very strongly that there's a whole scene going on here of heifers with us. Nancy, do you have a question?
But I think that the thing of, by the way, it sounded big to me, to use that term to operate like this, with the animal sacrifice, it took people to the fear. They were not good in sacrifice. And I guess God doesn't exist in this community.
Not that. but there are sacrifices 365 days a year, right? There are animal sacrifices 365 days a year. So the Akedah is interrupted because that sacrifice is one of a human. But there are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of sacrifices over the course of the year of animals. So like that's not like so unusual, and yeah. Right, well, too bad for that, but again, I don't know.
Levi's gotta eat.
Levites have to eat, like it's not clear, right? Here, the Levites are the one doing it. It's a fascinating piece, the law of the heifer whose neck has to be broken. Part of it again is the sense of here it's being used again that there are obligations on travelers, and it's not just that Jacob and Joseph remember the last conversation that they had together, but that conversation was one that related to how it gets Jacob off the hook a bit, because part of the charge on Jacob in that whole scene is that, what are you, an idiot? Like, you sent Joseph to his brothers who hate him. Like, of course they're going to kill him, but he's not totally. The idea here is he's not totally unconcerned for Joseph's safety. He escorted him out of town and thought that he was leaving him safely. That was sort of like just a short distance from here to there. That Joseph is the cause, or Jacob is the cause? Right. Well, in some sense, in one sense, you could say that that this digs Jacob a bigger hole, because in the text itself, he's giving him stuff, like he's giving him the fancy coat. But in the Midrash, it's even worse, because he's teaching him more. He's the star pupil, which everyone loves. Right, exactly, right, yeah. So it's even, right, so it's adding, not only is he getting all the stuff, not only is he the best looking, but also he's daddy's favorite and the smartest. No wonder they're just enraged at the sight of him and want to kill him. Like, in some ways it makes sense. Right. Ruvain and Yehuda are the ringleaders. Right.
Maybe Joseph was more interested in what's burning.
Yes. Well, that's sort of the implication of the text, is that he's just the good student. I mean, Shimon and Levi are hotheads, right? Like, they're men of action. Ruvain doesn't come off as all that smart, right? And Judah comes out as smartest, but it's not. But he's not like a quick study, right? It takes him a little while to get it. He has to go through some stuff in order to get there. Joseph, on the other hand, is consistently the smartest, except in like the interpersonal, like not cluelessly not knowing that his brothers hate him, or like the interpersonal, like not knowing, like not to brag about, oh, I had this dream that you're all bowing down to me. And it's exactly. So it's fascinating. Part of what I like about this last one is, one, it's great. Two, whereas the other ones, you get this sense of the primordial Torah being general, right? To sort of like that it's some ethical, do the right thing. Here, in the wagon / calf story, it's hyper specific, word for word, that what's in Deuteronomy, which is way later, right? Way later. That's sort of like, that's what Jacob and Joseph are discussing along the way. And what's more is that they sort of like weave it into the story of what is it about the wagons that makes Jacob believe his lying sons. Answer, all of this. The wagons are super significant. And that, so he knew, so Joseph knew the Torah that was not yet given. And all the sages knew the Torah that was not yet given. They would say that all the sages kept, all the avot kept all 613 mitzvot, which is obviously problematic because, Jacob marries two sisters, which is forbidden. Meat and milk.
So Joseph knew this Torah, and the sages knew this Torah, and the time frame between these two people.
So, I mean, well, Joseph is what? He's about 200 years before the Exodus. The Exodus is about 1200 BCE. And then the sages are, depending on when they are, you're putting the earliest ones, you'd say, 100 years BCE-ish to, 500.
So this 1600-year potential gap between Joseph and the sages, they're both studying the same, or are they
Studying the
whatever is available?
right? There's right. The oral law is the oral law, and what's there is what's there. But I just want to sort of point out that there's an expansive understanding of Torah that's more expansive than we might imagine, right? Like the fact that they feel free to take these wild flights of fancy. I'm not a Marvel movie guy, but there are multiple Spider-Verses. Do I have this correct? Of different timeline things like this. So it's not just them. The sages are totally comfortable with a multiverse where it doesn't always have to make sense. Where it's and the authentic tradition is to feel a degree of that freedom, right? They're not as boxed in as one might imagine. There really is both a freedom and a certain degree of playfulness. I think especially, there's a dead heifer with a broken neck, but that wagon heifer thing feels a little playful to me. Yes, so I cannot, every year when we sit and read this story and we get up to the wagons, this whole scene plays through in my head. And I'm like, there's no way I can say this. But every year this plays out in my head because to me, it's really rich and textured. Ad Khan. I don't know, we should end with the Kaddish Rabbanon. Because we'll take a break for the summer. But it's nice studying this stuff. So I teach this stuff because it otherwise I don't have the excuse to go into great depth. So being able to talk about it and hear other people's insights and hear different perspectives and pushbacks and what have you is good for me. And it's maybe the same like you say where we started, that it's supposed to bring God into this space. I feel like maybe that happens. Yikadal v'yikadash shmei Rabbam v'alma divrak kidutei v'yamlich malchutei chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei l'chol beit Yisrael ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru amen shmei Rabbam v'rach le'olam olamai barach v'yishtabach v'yifa'ar v'yitlamam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitlev d'lal shmei d'kudsha v'rifu e'ela min kol v'chata v'shirata v'shchata v'nechemata da'amiran ba'alma v'imru amen Al Yisrael va'al Rabbanan va'al Tamidehon va'al kol Tamidei Tamidehon va'al kol ma'an daskin v'raita di v'atar adin v'di v'chol atar v'atar e'el chon v'chon shlama rabba hin v'chista v'rachamim v'chayin arichin v'zna v'richa kadam min kadam avot v'yismaya v'yimru amen Hey shlama rabba min shmaya v'chaim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen Say shalom b'morav hubar hamav say shalom aleinu al kol Yisrael v'imru.
Amen. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Have a good summer, everybody. Oh, sure.
Yes. The davening is open all summer. It's Friday. There's a it's it'll be, I think it's like 8. It's on a flyer outside. Yeah. 8 on a Saturday night. Yes. It's late night Torah study.
8 at 8.
Yeah.
It'll be 8 at 8.
Yeah. But it is. It's a fun book.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you, Alice.
Have a good summer.
Arlene, good to see you.
Extra move, am I not?
Just yesterday. I'm just playing around a little bit. Swag. See.
No.
Good year.
Thank you.
Now we need another one next year.
Yes, we'll figure it out.
You get big and you don't have to eat right there.
It's not bad.
No, I like it.
There's no possibility now.
So, but I'm gonna make this for you guys and. I'm gonna get it on the now.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Nice to see you. Good about. Bye. Take care.
I'm going to ask for book. And one moment. I think it's super good to see you. I'm happy to work with Ryan and thank you for it's super good to have this stuff. I've had an email from the federal building, I know there's meeting the congregation before and getting people out and he wants to go into like the same business. Is it okay if I do the contact information? I didn't like know how to like put all that in. You know. That's good.
Okay. Yeah, I know that I'm recommending something. Crazy revelation.
Yeah.